In my last episode, I promised a story about another very special person I cast in Rain Man. That was Tom, who was an autistic savant with several remarkable abilities. For instance, he'd ask cast and crew members what their names were, as well as date and place of birth. Then, whenever he saw any of them, he'd repeat the personal information they'd given him. Whenever he saw me, which was several times a day, I might add, he'd say, "Marie Rowe, born in Coventry, England." Then he'd give my date of birth. He did this to at least 40 people, and he was never wrong. He was also a big Kenny Rogers fan and could quote every detail of the country singer's many albums. He could give the song order backwards and forwards, as well as liner notes from the sleeves of the records. These were just a couple of his skills. There were many more. In preparation for the development of his character of Raymond, Dustin Hoffman spent several months with 3 men who were also blessed with autistic savant abilities. He had a very special relationship with them, and was similarly welcomed into the arms of those with whom he would be spending time in Walbrook, the home where the character of Raymond had lived for most of his life. The location manager had actually thought that St. Anne's Convent in Kentucky would be the ideal location for Walbrook, and the director agreed. Thankfully, the nuns were very accommodating and enjoyed the whole of the filmmaking process. In fact, they were very sorry to see us leave. They had so much fun, they said. Since an actor hadn't yet been cast to play the Walbrook Doctor, Dustin, Tom Cruise and Barry Levinson all thought that co-producer of Rain Man, Jerry Molan, would be good for the role. He'd previously worked as a production manager with Dustin on Tootsie and wasn't an actor at all. But he did fit the role of a no-nonsense type of doctor very well. However, he was reluctant and insisted that we find a real actor to play the role. Well, since the stars and director were pleased with Jerry's performance, I'm afraid they won that battle. This was Jerry's first film role, and even though he went on to produce several films for Steven Spielberg, he also had cameos in a couple of those films too, including Jurassic Park and Amistad. Barry Levinson had been rehearsing with Dustin and Tom in their scene with the other doctor later on in the film. And again, the stars felt Barry was perfect for the role. So that was another actor out of a job. Since I cast 25 non-professional speaking roles for Rain Man, I suppose I was also guilty of taking roles away from actors who'd often spent years of training and would have given anything just to have one line in Rain Man. But it just didn't turn out that way. Since this was a road movie, Barry had trusted me to find authentic characters, real people, for the minor roles in the areas where we were filming. Of course, casting on location would also save hotel, per diem, and travel costs for actors from LA or New York. So that was definitely a consideration as well. I was in my element traveling to parts of America that were new to me, and I realized just how different every state was. There was even an hour's time difference between Cincinnati, Ohio, and a town in Kentucky, the name escapes me, where I'd gone for another open casting call. I'd driven over 100 miles and arrived at the restaurant at 8:30 a.m. for the 9 a.m. casting call. I was expecting to see my assistant waiting for me. She lived in that area and had arranged the venue and publicized the event. After my experience in Cincinnati, where over 2,000 people had turned up, I was shocked that the restaurant was deserted. There was absolutely no one in sight. No cars, no staff, no assistant, no applicants. This was well before cell or mobile phones, and I started to panic. Was I at the right restaurant? But I'd written the name and address down and mapped it out. Again, no sat-nav to help in those days. I managed to find a phone box and called my assistant's home number, but there was no response. Oh, what now? It was getting close to 9 a.m. when a truck drove up. A man in casual clothes stepped out and began walking towards the rear door of the restaurant. This was the manager, and I could tell he was surprised to see me. I explained who I was, and he said, "Oh, yeah, but I didn't expect anyone to be here this early." It turns out that it was 8 a.m., and apparently I'd crossed the line between Eastern Time and Central Time. Oh, I wish someone had told me. Eventually, a decent crowd of people showed up, and I was able to cast the 3 characters I needed: 2 traffic cops and a hotel clerk. When I was casting in Cincinnati, I auditioned a girl for the role of the bank clerk. I said something to her, and she didn't quite hear me. Instead of her saying, "Excuse me," or "Pardon me," or "Sorry," which we'd say in England, she said, "Please." I thought this was interesting, and it reminded me that Germans would often say "bitte" for please, or "pardon me." I asked if she was of German descent. She looked at me quizzically and said that indeed she was. It seems that there was a very large German population in Cincinnati. In fact, 1 in 4 families claimed German heritage. So, something else I learned on my travels through America. On the first day of filming Rain Man, while the crew was setting up a shot outside Walbrook, aka St. Anne's Convent, Barry came up to me and said he had an idea for his next film, about when his grandfather came to America from Russia. He described the first scene, his grandfather as a young man arriving in Baltimore on the 4th of July with fireworks to welcome him. I thought it sounded great, and it was a wonderful opening visual. Barry went on to explain more of the story in the script he wanted to write, which would be a tribute to his father and become the film Avalon. Now, all of this was going on in his mind while he was preparing to shoot the first scene of Rain Man. I always respected Barry's creative and brilliant mind, and this was a typical example of how he was able to juggle many thoughts and ideas at the same time, and then somehow separate them into a cohesive whole. I found it very stimulating and exciting, but this is how I felt about the film industry and the creative process in general. It was full of possibilities. And, as the saying goes, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Well, I believe this is true of everything in life. As much as Dustin Hoffman had researched the character of Raymond, and as wonderful an actor as he was not at all happy with his portrayal of Raymond during those first few days of filming. He was quite insecure, actually, about his performance, and he didn't think it was authentic. Often directors are reluctant for actors to watch the dailies, the scenes that have been filmed the day before, because it's rare that an actor is pleased with his work or the way he or she looks. But in Dustin's case, Barry respected that this highly esteemed actor knew more about the character he was playing than Barry did. This resulted in returning to St. Anne's Convent after the rest of the filming had been completed to reshoot the scenes between Raymond and Charlie outside Walbrook. By this time, Dustin was far more comfortable with his portrayal of Raymond. The next stop on the Rain Man road trip was Guthrie, Oklahoma, and as with the previous dates, I arrived 2 weeks prior to the actors and crew in order to find the right people to fill the roles to be filmed there. I also saw how different this state was from Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. I hired 2 local assistants, as well as a personal assistant for Barry, and held an open casting call at a community hall. When 2 men and a small boy arrived dressed as cowboys, I turned to my assistant, Carol, and said, "We don't have roles for cowboys, so why are they dressed like that?" She said, "Marie, they're dressed that way because they are cowboys. That's how they always dress." So now I really was in cowboy country. I even got invited to a rodeo, which was a real thrill, as was the Red Earth Festival in Oklahoma City, which celebrated Native American culture and particularly Indian tribes in Oklahoma. Seeing hundreds of Native Americans dancing together in their beautiful beaded and feathered costumes to the steady beat of drums was electrifying. Many tribes believe that the beat of the drums represents the unwavering pulse of Mother Earth, and I definitely felt that. I was mesmerized, while Pat, Barry's new assistant, said the constant beat of the drums gave her a headache. I met an Indian chief, a real-life Indian chief, Saginaw Grant, at the Red Earth Festival, and we became friends. He was interested in acting and went on to appear in several films. A year or so later, when there was a Native American powwow in Santa Monica, where I live, Saginaw invited me. When the dancing began, he grabbed my hand and pulled me into the line of incredibly attired Native Americans to dance to the beat of the drums. Although I was quite self-conscious in my jeans and t-shirt, I was thrilled to be included in this sacred dance, which incidentally was harder than it looked. Next time, from cowboys and Indians to farm family. If you're enjoying my episodes, my social media guru, Horatio, has asked that you please like the recordings, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when I post my next episode on Sunday. Many thanks, and your support is greatly appreciated.